All right, welcome back to our next lesson for this week. Still continuing on in Module 2.1 of Ecosystems and Nutrient Cycling. So in the previous video, we looked at our definitions of the various aspects of a biome, right? We talked about the biosphere, why it failed, and things of that nature. So two other things I want to address in this video are going to be two main ideas of limiting factors for communities or populations or individuals, and then the range of tolerance. So what can a species feasibly withstand before it can either reproduce or not reproduce, etc. So starting with this idea of the limiting factor. So a limiting factor is a critical resource whose supply determines the population size of a given species in each ecosystem. I know it's a bit wordy here, so I'm going to try and break this down as easily as I can. So a way that you can think about this is as humans, right? Think about what you need in your day-to-day life to live, thrive, and survive. We, of course, need water. We can only live, 3 days without water, right? But we also need other nutrients like carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, other different vitamins and minerals, whereas things like plants need a different proportion of each nutrient, right? So maybe you've seen advertisements for like greens powders, like AG1 is a big one that's out and about now, which I take. But, it's filled with all these various nutrients and minerals and vitamins that we need to live a healthy life and for our body to function properly, right? And then that also varies from human to human. What if you have allergies or if you have like autoimmune disorders where you can't actually have types of minerals? That's a thing. Or think about like iodized salt, right? Like you need to take iodine in a different way if you're not getting it from salt. So some environments or foods may have a specific nutrient that is easy to acquire, but in others it may be more difficult to find. Like say, for example, crops in agriculture are often limited by nitrogen. So farmers have to put nitrogen-rich fertilizer on their crops in order for their crops to continue to grow. And like the farmers have to they have to bring in that nutrients, that fertilizer, for that to happen. It isn't just in the soils because they're unfortunately quite depleted. So that's kind of a thing there. So as a nutrient is used up, it may not be replenished quickly enough. To quickly enough or at all, unfortunately, which can cause problems for organisms to grow, reproduce, or survive, right? And sometimes that's limited, site specific, which is kind of interesting. So Cañada actually sits on serpentine soils, which is created from the weathering of underlying I'm gonna totally say this terribly. Serpentinite rock. Probably did not say that right. Apologies. So that means that the soils are low on calcium. So many plants actually cannot grow here, which is really quite interesting. Or if you can think of something else like wine grapes, there's a reason why wine flourishes here in California. And if you are a wine drinker, if you've tried different types of wine like different soils, and that can then create different flavors. Oftentimes up in like the Napa area, there's a lot of volcanic soil there, or even up in like Healdsburg, St. Helena area. So that's one way that can like modify that particular plant, that particular crop. Or, not having, there's the opposite idea where instead of not having enough, you have way, way, way too much. So a good example of that would be like algae blooms that you can see in ponds and lakes or in oceans. And if too much nutrients is being filtered into a region, that's literally called eutrophication. And that can create horrible down the line impacts. Maybe you've heard of something called dead zones in the ocean, and that's from this process of eutrophication. So essentially, all of the farms in the Midwest of the United States, they put all this stuff on their crops to make them grow, like fertilizers and stuff. Then all of that leaches into the groundwater or goes into the Mississippi River, which flows down the middle of the U.S., and deposits into the Gulf of Mexico. And oftentimes what happens is when that deposition happens, that causes plankton blooms because there's more nutrients. So plankton are like, oh my God, hi, thank you so much for coming. Let's have a party. And then that will then deplete the entire surface water of oxygen, which then depletes everything underneath the surface of oxygen as well. And it can be kind of detrimental because everything needs oxygen to survive. So it can have mass die-offs. We've seen die-offs of creatures here in the bay as well from similarly eutrophication. Next idea I want to address is that of the range of tolerance. So a range of tolerance simply means that, there is a specific range between within upper and lower limits of a factor that allows a species to survive and reproduce, right? So the environmental gradient in this case on the x-axis is temperature. You could replace that, with anything on the y-axis. Like you could, again, think various nutrients or moisture or whatever. Redwood trees really only grow along the coast of California. Otherwise, you have other types of trees because they need to live within this certain moisture space. And then populations with a wide range of tolerance will likely be able to adapt to a changing environment than populations with a very small range of tolerance. And then the range also will vary during a life cycle. Like, for example, when you were a little fetus in your mama, you had a different range of tolerance, right? Like you could only, you had so much within the womb. And then now as a full-blown human being, outside of that, you have different tolerances now as well. And that even changes, throughout your life additionally, right? Like the older you get, the different nutrients you need, the different amount of sleep you need to get to function, the different amounts of stress you can actually handle before you find your breaking point or your burnout point, suffering from burnout, or, we have in the past, that kind of thing. I'm just trying to think of ways that you can connect to this idea and not just think about like ecosystems and animals and things that maybe aren't as tangible for you. So that is the end of this particular lesson. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy.